Thank you. This is our second week of talking about this idea of experiencing spirituality following the book by the same name by Ernest Kurtz and Catherine Ketchum. Last week we began with the topic beyond spirituality, and this week we're on the topic of listening. And also we've been taking Wednesday evenings a little deeper with the topics. And if you missed last Wednesday, you can pick up the study guide that we prepared. It's outside next to the giving kiosk on the left. And we focused on a story from the book about a monk who goes to his guru for initiation. And the guru leans forward and whispers in his ear a warning and says, if you take this mantra that I'm going to give you and tell it to anyone, that person will be immediately liberated and set free from all bondage forever, but you will suffer in hell permanently. And as soon as the master whispers the mantra into the monk's ear, he jumps up and runs out and gathers as many people as he can together and tells them all the mantra. And later on, when the rest of the monks are complaining about his disobedience, the master says, I've got nothing to teach him. He's already a master in his own rights. The idea is that we can learn through stories to see the filter of other people's experience of life, and sometimes that can inspire us to take the high road. And sometimes what it does is it helps us connect to each other on a heart level. Our hearts open when we hear each other's stories. A deeper caring can happen. Hopefully that will lead to the kind of vision that Kevin mentioned earlier, a world that works for everyone, because that has to be accompanied by a desire to help each other. Now, for the benefit of our radio listening audience and those watching on our web through the videos, we just heard a song from our music director, Christopher Fritchie. It's a story. It's telling the story of a son who receives the call from a care facility taking care of his mom, who woke up into a moment of lucidity and clarity, and he rushes over to see her, but she can't quite remember the details of her own life. And so he gets right down there and he tells them to her. And the tender part of that story, for me at least, I believe, is that in order for me to be able to tell someone what that son told his mother, I would first have had to listen to them. If I didn't listen to them, I couldn't tell them. That's what we're considering in the second week of this experiencing spirituality, this idea of listening to the people in our lives, listening to life itself, and then listening to divinity, which we've been trying to define all month, all year, to listen. In my late 20s, I started to realize that I didn't know too much about my grandmother on my mother's side. I was too young at first, because I had been up until that point in that phase of my life where everything was about me. I didn't really have time to listen to her or take her in, but I started to be moved by this tremendous sense of connection, of wanting to know more about her. So I would make a point of that, going to visit her and talk to her and sit her down and ask her, tell me about your school, tell me about your mother, tell me about your father, tell me about your life. And she did. And it wasn't all easy to hear. Some of what she told me brought me to tears. Parts of her story shattered my sense of innocence about the world. Parts of her story made me furious and frustrated that I couldn't do anything to repair what was already in the past. And she told me about her mother, who was clearly, from her account, mentally ill, made worse by alcoholism, and how she would show up at my grandmother's school early in the morning quite drunk and quite out of touch with her reality, and would drag my grandmother out of school to take her home, make a big fuss in front of the other children, take her home to do chores. And I could hear, as she told the story, in between the words, I could hear the pain and the conflict of a daughter loving her mentally ill alcoholic mother. And the resignation to the fact that she was never able to make the kind of difference that she wanted to. And I got to hear from my grandmother how the alcoholism repeated again in her life in the form of her husband in particularly violent ways, at a time in the world when women had even fewer protections and fewer equalities and rights than they do today. And as I listened to her, I began to appreciate that as she talked, I never heard her blame any of the characters in the story. She never talked badly about her mother or about her husband, ever. She never cussed. She never used profanity. And she resolutely refused to complain about the hardships that life dealt her. And listening to her was like an education in courage and dignity. And now I realize that actually I could have told her story back to her, like the son in the story told his mother, because I had listened to her deeply. But I haven't always listened that graciously to the people in my life. And so today the reminder is to me to listen to the people in my life, to take interest in them and to ask them what is valuable, what is important, what is meaningful to them in a gentle, non-invasive, non-intrusive, non-insistent way. And particularly to listen to the parts that I may not want to hear. To let it be real. Especially because I may not have another opportunity to do so. I mean, what if this, right now, were our last time to be together? Would we not want to be more kind with each other? Would we not want to let the moment and every part of it imprint upon us deeply so that it is part of our very being? This is a book of beautiful stories, and there's one on page 107. It says, one Sunday I was entertained in a farm home of a member of a rural church. The intelligence and unusually good behavior of the only child in the home, a little 4-year-old boy, impressed me. Then I discovered one of the reasons for the child's charm. The mother was at the kitchen sink washing the intricate parts of the cream separator when the little boy came to her with a magazine. "Mother," he asked, "what is the man doing in this picture?" To my surprise, she dried her hands, sat down on a chair, and taking the boy in her lap, she spent the next few minutes answering his questions. After the child had left, I commented on her having interrupted her chores to answer the boy's questions, saying some wouldn't have done that. She said, "Oh, I expect to be washing cream separators for the rest of my life. But never again will my son ask me that question." Oh, there are a great many important questions in our world today that I do not wish to interrupt myself to attend to, because I don't know how to handle them. I don't want to let them in because they're too painful. And if they come up in conversation, I try to tune them out because it's embarrassing that I know not enough and I don't think about it deeply enough. And maybe you have a few of those. Like, for example, today on International Women's Day, to think about the status of women in our country and in the world, and thinking about the global vision of a world that works for everyone, and understanding that it can never be a world that works for everyone until women are categorically and absolutely equal to men. Or like that phrase in the global visions that says, we see a world in which there is renewed kinship with all life. And how it can never be like that if I refuse to listen to the inhumane treatment of animals in our food industry, if it is too inconvenient for me to know about what happens to chickens in order for them to produce eggs in the amounts that we need. Or that part of the global vision that says, we see a world in which there's generous and ongoing sharing of love and resources, and how it can never be that way until I take in the world and listen to the idea that we have enough food to feed every mouth, but don't. Or that part in the global vision that says we see ourselves as being planetary stewards, and how it can never be that way while I don't attend to or listen to or think about or read about or talk about the declining quality of our world's oceans and the rapid mass deforestation that continues, and the condition of the world's water. But I do want to practice listening. And just like I'm practicing listening to the people in my life, I'm practicing listening to life and taking it in, even the inconvenient parts. This is how my grandmother listened. She took it in. From the book, listening, hearing may be the most difficult gift we ever give to anyone or to the world. We are so inclined to action, to attempt to fix situations, or at the very least, and too tragically often at the very most, we are driven to advise. My grandmother listened in that way of being present. She would put down whatever she was doing, and she would focus squarely on me or whoever was talking to her, and listen and take it in and connect with that listening. And then she would follow it up with her key phrase, "Oh, that's terrible." I was taught in our spiritual tradition to mindfully reframe everything in a positive light, to look for the silver lining and focus on that and attend to that and articulate it and speak from positivity. Not my grandmother. No, she just commiserated. Oh, that's terrible. Funny thing is that all of those of us who went to her for comfort, we felt amazing and awesome afterwards. We felt heard and valued and witnessed and hopeful, not fixed. Here's a photo of me and my grandmother. See, the thing about that photo, and I'm not going to mention the hair, the thing about that photo is that I had just told her that I had rolled a car and left it in a ditch. Yeah, you can just see the placid, as constant as the northern star, she was just there, and she would often add to the end of a disclosure like this, there. It's all going to work out in the end. which infuriated me. But today I realized that she was just announcing the cosmic truth, right? The truth that I claim to love. In a way, she believed in the ultimate goodness of life more than I ever have. That phrase you heard Kevin say, our founder, the ultimate goal of all life is a complete freedom of discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. She believed in it. I hoped it was true. She had more confidence in the way of things than I had in my little finger. In her, I got that mixed up, but you understood, yeah? I had to stop and think, what did I just say? All right. And very polite of you not to correct me. And the thing is, my grandmother had every reason to complain about the hardships that life dealt her. But she chose not to. Her hands so gnarled from arthritis and her feet swollen past resembling a human foot. And yet she still, in all of this, had time to listen, to be present, and to connect from the book. And yet listening, hearing, and truly attending to, I love that. That's serving people. Attending to requires a very explicit context of silence. Genuine, active, attentive silence is not only the setting, but the most difficult form of this difficult gift. It's not only being quiet while you're witnessing somebody talking. To me, it means it's also being quiet inside. In other words, dropping my reactive mind, dropping my tendency to insert the wise answer, dropping my tendency to control, educate, but to listen. To listen not only to the surface noise, but to what is present in the room despite the surface noise. It requires an attitude of silence. There's a beautiful story in the book about a man who goes to see his guru and says he's having trouble with his wife, the relationship, and the guru says, your assignment is to go home and listen to your wife for a week. And the man comes back and says, I've listened to my wife for a week. And the guru says, now go back and listen to what she's not saying. I found that so powerful. To listen not only to the surface noise, but to everything else requires some mindfulness. I have a sense that good listening in this way is what connects us to reality, to what is really going on. And I know for me, I have to practice dropping what I think is going on and listen to the world and listen to the people, and then also to listen to the world within me. Divinity speaks within. A preacher once humorously said that the difference between prayer and meditation is that in prayer, that's the time when we talk at God, whereas in meditation, it's the only opportunity that God gets to talk to us. I've liked that ever since I heard it, because it's helped me to think of meditation as a form, a very important form of listening. I think of meditation as the practice of being available to something that is within me. Think of it as granting my higher power or higher self or whatever you want to call it an opportunity to express itself in an uninterrupted way, uninterrupted by my argument or my opinion. I try to imagine it as I was given an audience, I was given a meeting with someone I truly admire, someone on whose every word I would hang, and knowing that it was the last time we would ever be together. I think of meditation as politely paying attention in that way. Now, in the beginning, when I started to sit quietly, well, what I met inside was my thoughts. Oh, my inner chat, and there was a lot of it. It was very busy, and it was so powerful and so compelling that I had to learn eventually to give my mind something to do, to distract it, so that the silence that was always there could rise up. And that's what we're going to be doing on Friday the 13th at the free chant experience. We're going to give our minds something to chew on so that the rich, beautiful silence can rise up. I had to listen. I had to learn to listen to my inner thought. Just like I had to learn to listen to people. I had to understand that not everything I would hear would be pleasant. I had to learn to be like my grandmother and just take it all in. Because as I was deflecting and refusing and not listening and talking over and giving my opinion, I was missing so much of what was actually there. Like the beautiful story of Joshua Bell in the book too. The famous violinist who stood in a subway, I believe in New York, playing, but nobody knew who he was, so they didn't pay attention. He's playing on a violin worth more than many of us could ever hope to earn. Masterful performance of one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire. A couple of people threw a few dollars down. Most didn't even notice that right there in their presence is a precious jewel. See, and that, to me, that's what life is like. When I take time to sit and notice, I start to realize precious jewels right here. Sitting still just for 5 minutes, like we sit at the beginning of our service together, it opened a whole world for me, and I noticed I began to listen to the everywhere presentness of life itself. And the thing is that it started to influence me. I can say that after sitting for 30 days consecutively, just with no agenda, I can say my personality changed. And I think what happened is that it reconnected me as I began to drop my reactive mind just very gently. It reconnected me to hope and to courage and the remembrance of the amazing creativity that is in us. Trust came back. I had to turn it into a ritual. I do well with rituals. I would first spend a few minutes preparing the place where I was going to sit. Make sure it was tidy and clean. For me, I like that. Then I would put in a timer of 5 minutes and just sit there with no agenda in the beginning. And then when it was done, I would take my time getting up from it. That's all I did. It wasn't rocket science. I just sat still. And I think what it did was it taught me that there is a deep, beautiful stillness, always available, always present. People ask me, why do I recommend meditation so much? And I think my answer is because I believe that the real you, the real me, is to be found there. Not in our reactive mind, not in our smarts, and not in the surface noise, but in that quiet time is where our hope is, when we drop the craziness and calm down. And it can be simple. It can be as simple as just listening to your own breathing. Sometimes when I do that, I imagine that I'm listening to the ocean, bringing the ocean into wherever I am. Sometimes I think I'm paying attention to a gentle wind in a garden. And it's a wonderful practice because you can do it anywhere. Turn it on and off at will, this listening to your breathing, even at a desk, in a car, in a restroom, on a walk. You don't even need to close your eyes. You can do it with me right now. Oh, you have to be so quiet inside to hear your own breathing. And we can call that sacred space. And Joseph Campbell said that our sacred space is where we can go and find ourselves over and over again. You can find ourselves by listening. I invite you to breathe in deeply with me now and to exhale sighing as we let our eyes close, if that feels convenient, for a moment of prayer in which we recognize that one infinite source from which we all come, the Creator, creation itself, the intelligence that puts this appearing world together in magnificent ways, the invisible power of being, whatever it is. We recognize it so that we may remember together that this is where we live, and this is what we inherit, and this is what we have claim to. The everywhere presentness is our own expansive nature. The creative power of the universe is our own ability to think, solve, imagine, and dream. This power, which has no center and no circumference, is our own ability to expand beyond anything we've ever imagined before. And as we think upon these things, we have naturally the realization of the true truth of our being. That we are powerful and able to take in the world and its beings. We are courageous and dignified and able to stand in the presence of that which is difficult to behold and to meet it with compassion and justice and sharing and beauty. As we pray in this way, we are being reconnected to our heart of hope and clarity. Our sense of participation is expanding, and we are waking up to the power that we have at the center of our being. It is a wonderful and beautiful thing to pray this way. And so we release this word of prayer into the law of mind, understanding that as we do so, it is done and done very well. That we have been changed. And together we say, and so it is.